Welcome to another deep dive. This one's going to be a bit different.
Yeah, it is. Kind of like a journey through time, through place.
Yeah, back to the early 90s.
Yeah.
All right, like right after the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
To those places they call the borderlands.
The borderlands, yeah. But these aren't just lines on a map,
Right.
They're cultural crossroads.
Yeah, for sure.
We're talking Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Moldova.
Yeah, and all shaped by just centuries of empires, like rising and falling, languages mixing, religions overlapping.
Yeah, it's really fascinating.
Our guide for this deep dive is Anne Applebaum and her book, Between East and West. It's like a time capsule, right?
Yeah, exactly. Capturing those raw emotions, those hopes, uncertainties.
Yeah. As these countries were trying to figure out who they were.
Who they were now.
Yeah.
After the Soviet Union crumbled.
After the Soviet Union crumbled.
You know what I think is so important for listeners to understand is that getting a handle on the borderlands, even back then, really helps us make sense of the tensions, the complexities that we see playing out today.
Yeah.
It's like looking at the roots of a really old tree, to understand how it's grown.
So let's start this journey where Applebaum did in Kaliningrad.
Oh, Kaliningrad.
Some people might notice its old name, Königsberg.
Mm-hmm.
It's a piece of Russia wedged between Poland and Lithuania. And Applebaum, she really paints a picture of this strange, almost ghostly atmosphere.
Yeah, it's strange. You've got this militarized port city with resting warships, a population that suddenly is told, hey, you're Russian now. And then they have this sort of remnant of a German past that they can barely remember. That's a lot to grapple with.
She even describes taking a ferry from Gdansk in Poland to get there. And she says the Polish ticket salesman refused to take anything but Deutsche Marks.
Oh, wow.
It's just those little details, that really tell you how much history is layered in this one place.
Yeah, it's like the echoes of those old economic and cultural ties haven't really faded. Even though the borders have shifted, the politics have shifted. It makes you wonder, what does it even mean to belong somewhere when the ground beneath you is constantly shifting,
And that question of identity, it really hits hard when Applebaum tries to find someone who identifies as a Königsberger, someone connected to that city's German past. And out of this whole city, she finds only 3 people registered as German.
3 people? Wow.
One is in a mental hospital.
Oh.
Another one is too sick to talk. And the last one doesn't even have a phone.
That's incredible.
I know.
It's not just a statistic, you know? It's a human story. It's like a stark reminder of how redrawing borders can really uproot people. Fragment communities, cut these cultural threads, their ghosts are still there.
Well, she did manage to speak with one Königsberger who stayed, Gerda Petrovna. And Gerda's memories of that city's destruction during the war and the disappearance of its German population, it's just haunting. It's this feeling of being caught between worlds, belonging nowhere.
And Applebaum, she picks up on that feeling of displacement, even in the city's landscape. She talks about the eerie stillness of the Kaliningrad port. With warships that never carried any goods, never saw battle. It's like a potent symbol, wouldn't you say, of this militarized society that's almost completely disconnected from everyday life.
Yeah. And even something as simple as taking pictures, it became stressful there. She mentioned this German tourist who gets warned not to photograph anything military. You know, it just highlights that lingering atmosphere of suspicion and control.
Yeah, and that's a key point, I think, for your listeners to remember. You know that the transition from Soviet rule, it wasn't clean, it wasn't easy. It's like they traded one form of control for another. The ghosts of the past are very much present, shaping people's behavior, their outlook on life.
So from this almost spectral Kaliningrad, we travel south to Lithuania, a country where Catholicism and resisting the Soviets were like 2 sides of the same coin.
And here's where understanding the larger historical context is so crucial, Lithuania, along with its Baltic neighbors, they were forcibly absorbed into the Soviet Union during World War II. Imagine having your independence ripped away and then being forced to become part of this system that's trying to erase your culture, your identity.
Yeah, and Applebaum, she doesn't just tell us about this. She introduces us to people who lived it, like Petrus, whose faith is rooted in witnessing mass deportations to Siberia from his village on the Lithuanian-Polish border.
Can you imagine that? Seeing your neighbors, your friends, maybe even your family herded onto trains and not knowing if they'd ever come back.
It's just...
That's the chilling reality of Soviet control, right? deportations, ethnic cleansing, crushing any dissent. These policies didn't just move people, they redrew the whole human geography of the region,
Yeah.
fracturing communities, reshaping identities through force.
And it's in Lithuania that Applebaum meets Father Stanislovas, a priest who did something really remarkable. He collected and displayed iron crosses. These are traditional Lithuanian crucifixes that blend Christian and pagan symbols. It's a small act, but it's powerful.
It is. Think about what that meant under Soviet rule,
Yeah.
right? It's a quiet but defiant way of saying, we are still Lithuanian. You can try to erase our culture, but you won't succeed.
Yeah.
You won't succeed.
It speaks to this enduring power of cultural identity, even in the face of oppression. Like a wildflower pushing up through concrete, it finds a way.
It does. And, it highlights the fact that the Soviets, that Soviet attempt to create this homogenous Soviet man, ultimately failed. People clung to their traditions, their languages, their beliefs. They refused to be erased.
Yeah. And Father Stanislovas, his story is fascinating. He was actually born Polish, but chose to embrace Lithuanian identity. Even changed his name to reflect that.
He represents a whole generation, doesn't he, that witnessed the most brutal aspects of Soviet rule. And their stories, like Father Stanislovas, they're so crucial for understanding that trauma that still shapes the region today.
There's this young man who is helping Father Stanislovas rebuild a monastery, Brother Francis.
Okay.
And he's considering a monastic life, but he's also really curious about the world, especially Paris.
Oh.
It's like he's caught between this pull towards tradition and this allure of a world that was closed off to him for so long.
It's that tension so many in the borderlands felt after the fall of the Soviet Union. It's like this door suddenly swung open, offering possibilities that were unimaginable before, but it also created anxiety. What did freedom mean? What did the future hold?
And that uncertainty leads us to Applebaum's next stop, Belarus. This is a country wrestling with its Belarusian and Russian identities, trying to find its own path in a world that's just been upended.
It's important to remember that Belarus, like Ukraine, they were heavily Russified under Soviet rule. Their languages, their cultures, they were suppressed in favor of Russian dominance. So declaring independence wasn't just about drawing lines on a map. It was about rediscovering who they were.
In Belarus, Applebaum meets Igor, a poet who embraces postmodernism and sees this incredible potential for reinventing Belarusian culture. He's drawn to Western philosophers, Heidegger, Foucault. He's finding in their ideas a way to break free from those old Soviet ways of thinking.
Igor really embodies that intellectual optimism that kind of blossomed after the collapse of the Soviet Union, didn't he?
Yeah.
There's this feeling that anything was possible, that they could finally, truly forge their own paths.
But Applebaum, she also points out the obstacles. Like Igor talks about how the Soviets tried to replace genuine peasant culture with these mass-produced imitations, essentially eroding authentic Belarusian traditions. He and his friends would go on these expeditions in the countryside searching for real artisans, people that were keeping those traditions alive.
This really highlights that complexity of cultural revival. It's not just about rejecting Soviet influence. It's about digging deep, rediscovering, reclaiming what was lost or intentionally buried,
And there's this constant tension between Igor's hope for a unique Belarusian future and the reality on the ground. Applebaum sees that Belarus, despite declaring independence, is still very much under the shadow of Soviet culture and politics. It's like they're trying to walk forward while still being tethered to the past.
It's a tough position to be in.
And that tension plays out in this kind of awkward encounter that Vidley has. He's a young man who's fascinated by the history of Belarusian Jews. And he has this encounter with a Lubavitcher from Brooklyn.
Oh, okay. And now for those who maybe aren't familiar, the Lubavitchers are a Hasidic Jewish movement, right?
Yeah.
Known for their outreach and their very traditional views.
Yeah.
And this particular Lubavitcher has a very rigid view of Jewish identity, going so far as to question Applebaum's own Jewishness based on her appearance.
It just goes to show how, even within the same cultural group, interpretations of identity can be so different.
Oh, yeah.
Sometimes even conflicting.
It's like everyone's trying to piece together their own puzzle of identity using the fragments they have. And sometimes those pieces just don't fit neatly together,
From Belarus, we journey into Ukraine, a country that has this incredibly complex relationship with Russia. Applebaum starts in Lviv, a city that's like a microcosm of Ukraine's multifaceted identity. You got Polish influences, Ukrainian influences, Jewish influences, all layered on top of each other.
Yeah, Lviv's history is like a crash course
Yeah.
in the shifting borders and cultural exchanges that have shaped the borderlands. It's been part of Poland, Austria-Hungary, the Soviet Union, and now, finally, independent Ukraine.
But even in a place as diverse as Lviv, there are divisions. Applebaum meets a Ukrainian nationalist named Hel, who is extremely critical of the post-Soviet business elite. He accuses them of corruption, of being puppets of Moscow.
That was a very widespread fear across the former Soviet republics, that the old Soviet power structures would just reassert themselves under the guise of capitalism.
And then on the other side of that coin, Applebaum also speaks with a businessman, Inokyan, who defends his company, LV Holding, against these accusations of being a mafia controlled by Moscow. He sees his business as this model of healthy competition, proof that Ukraine can thrive economically on its own terms.
It highlights those massive economic challenges these countries faced, Transitioning to a market economy, it was often chaotic, sometimes even predatory. And that created winners and losers, fueling resentment and suspicion. And it wasn't just about economics, right? It was about who held the power, who controlled the resources, and who benefited from this new system.
So just as we're starting to grasp the complexities of Ukraine, Applebaum takes us on a quick detour to Moldova, specifically this breakaway region called Transnistria.
Transnistria. Think of it like a frozen conflict, a relic of the Soviet era where the past is very much present. It's a territory with a predominantly Russian population that resisted Moldovan independence. And it essentially exists in this limbo state.
It's like a microcosm of those unresolved tensions simmering beneath the surface in so many of these places that Applebaum visits.
Yeah.
These ghosts of empire refusing to be laid to rest.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that the collapse of the Soviet Union didn't magically solve everything. Many of those tensions, those unresolved issues of identity and belonging, they're still very much with us today. Transnistria also highlights this concept of frozen conflicts that's so prevalent in the former Soviet space.
Yeah.
These conflicts that never really ended, they just sort of froze, simmering tensions, the potential to just reignite at any moment.
It's a stark reminder that history isn't linear. It's messy, unpredictable. And speaking of history, we circle back to Ukraine, this time to the ancient city of Kamenets-Podilsky.
Kamenets-Podilsky. Now, this is a visual reminder of the region's turbulent history, isn't it? Imagine a city perched on this rocky island, surrounded by a canyon, with layers of fortifications from different eras. It's like stepping back in time.
Yeah, and in this city, steeped in history, Applebaum encounters this woman named Yelena, who embodies this sense of isolation and despair.
Yeah.
Yelena mourns the decay of her city, feels intellectually stifled, trapped.
You know her story and the story of her young assistant Sveta, who has never been anywhere and doubts she ever will. It speaks to the psychological weight of living in a place that's been marginalized, neglected, almost forgotten.
Yeah.
It's a stark contrast to that optimism we saw with Igor back in Belarus.
It's heartbreaking. She talks about how people like her, educated with a wider perspective, are no longer needed or valued. It's like the rug was pulled out from under them and they're left grappling with this sense of loss and uncertainty.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that the post-Soviet transition, it wasn't a victory lap for everyone, For many, it brought economic hardship, social upheaval, and just this profound sense of displacement, this feeling of not knowing where they fit in this new world.
As we journey with Applebaum through these diverse landscapes, we meet these incredibly different individuals, and certain themes start to emerge.
Yeah.
What are some of those big takeaways, the threads that connect these seemingly disparate stories?
One of the most striking themes, I think, is this constant negotiation of identity.
Yeah.
Who am I when the empires that I've known crumble, when the borders shift, when the language I speak is suddenly deemed, less important? It's a question that haunts almost every person Applebaum encounters.
Yeah.
From the ticket salesman clinging to Deutschmarks to the young man yearning for Paris.
And it's not just about national identity.
Right.
It's about cultural identity.
Right.
Religious identity, even personal identity. They're all kind of intertwined, constantly being reshaped by these external forces.
Precisely. And that brings us to another, I think, really key theme, this resilience of culture. Despite attempts to erase it, suppress it, culture finds a way to endure. Whether it's Father Stanislovas collecting those iron crosses, Igor translating Western philosophy into Belarusian, or the artisans in the Belarusian countryside keeping those traditional crafts alive, It's a testament to that human need to connect with something larger than themselves, something that gives them meaning and a sense of belonging.
It's like those wildflowers we talked about, pushing up through the cracks in the pavement. They may be battered, but they refuse to be broken.
That's a great way to put it. But there's also that shadow side to that resilience, isn't there? A deep-seated trauma that lingers long after the oppressors are gone. The memories of those deportations, the suppression of language and religion, the constant fear of the secret police, those scars run deep.
Yeah, and sometimes those scars, they manifest in unexpected ways.
Yeah.
Like that suspicion towards outsiders, the distrust of anyone perceived as different, this clinging to old symbols of power,
Yeah.
even though those symbols represent a system that no longer exists.
It's like a phantom limb syndrome almost.
Right.
The pain of what's been lost or taken away, it still resonates.
Yeah.
Even though the physical wound might have healed. And that pain, it can be passed down through generations, shaping how people view the world, themselves, their place in it.
It makes you realize that the fall of the Soviet Union wasn't just a political event.
No.
It was a seismic cultural shift, like an earthquake,
Yeah.
that continues to send tremors through these societies long after the initial shock.
And you, as a listener, have to understand that these tremors are still being felt today, They shape the political landscape, the social dynamics, even those personal anxieties and aspirations of the people living in these borderlands. It's a living history, constantly evolving, impacting the present.
Applebaum's journey really emphasizes that these borderlands are more than just geographical spaces. They're spaces of the mind, of the soul,
Yeah.
of collective memory and individual struggle.
Exactly. They are those places where East meets West, where past collides with present, where that battle for identity is constantly being waged. And understanding these borderlands, understanding their history and the complexities they embody, it's crucial for grasping those forces that are shaping our world today.
So as we near the end of this journey with Applebaum, what's the most important message you want our listener to take away from this deep dive?
Well, the most important message is that history isn't some distant echo.
Yeah.
It's a living presence that shapes our understanding of the world and ourselves. The stories we've explored, the people we've met, the struggles they've endured, they all offer these valuable lessons about that enduring power of culture, the complexities of identity, and the long shadow of trauma.
And as we move forward, it's crucial to remember that these borderlands aren't just remnants of a bygone era. They are those front lines of a new world order. A world where that battle for hearts and minds is just as important as the battle for territory. Makes you wonder what's become of these people, these places, in the decades since Applebaum's journey. Have they found their footing? Have those wildflowers managed to blossom?
It's the question that lingers, isn't it? And it reminds us that Applebaum's book, it's just a snapshot, a glimpse into this particular moment. But the story doesn't end there. It's like she gives us the first chapter, and then it's up to us to keep reading to see how that narrative unfolds.
And as we consider those next chapters, it's worth remembering one of Applebaum's observations. She points out that while these borderlands have been constantly invaded, their borders redrawn, allegiances shifted, the people, they've held on to their unique customs, their dialects, their ways of life.
It speaks to those deep roots of culture, doesn't it? The way it anchors people, even when the world around them is spinning. It's a testament to that human spirit, I think, to that innate desire to connect with something larger than oneself, something that provides meaning and continuity in a world that often feels chaotic and unpredictable.
But she also doesn't shy away from the lasting impact of those attempts to erase that cultural diversity. Particularly the Soviet efforts to create this single, homogenous Soviet identity.
Right, and that's the dark side of the coin, isn't it? That legacy of trauma that continues to shape these societies. And we see it most clearly in those stories of the people who were deported, ripped from their homes, forced to abandon their languages, their traditions. It's a wound that may have healed on the surface, but those scars, they run deep.
Yeah, it really makes you appreciate the power of even like small acts of resistance. Father Stanislovas with his iron crosses. Igor translating Western philosophy into Belarusian. These aren't just like intellectual exercises, they're acts of defiance, of reclaiming agency in a world that tried to strip it away.
Absolutely. Absolutely. They're saying, we are still here, we remember who we are, and we will not be silenced.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we're left with more questions than answers. But maybe that's the point.
Maybe it is. That's the beauty of a journey like this, I think. It's not about those neat conclusions or easy solutions. It's about opening your mind to new perspectives, challenging your assumptions, recognizing the complexities of a world that is constantly evolving.
If our listener could take away just one thing from this exploration of the borderlands, what would you want it to be?
I would want them to remember that these aren't just places on a map, you know. They are living, breathing spaces, inhabited by people, with rich histories, complex identities, and enduring hopes for a better future.
And while Applebaum's book offers this powerful glimpse into the past, it's up to us to stay curious, seek out contemporary perspectives. Keep asking those difficult questions about identity, belonging, that legacy of empire in a world that is still grappling with the ghosts of its past.
Remember, the borderlands aren't just a region, they're a mirror, reflecting the tensions and possibilities of our interconnected world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to keep exploring those ever-changing landscapes of our world.
Thank you for tuning in to the Power Book of Podcasts. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and join our growing community. Click the bell icon so you never miss an update. We have so much more inspiring content coming your way.